faster than a speeding typewriter, more powerful than a printing press, able to speak over tall buildings in a single sound. Look, up on the dial!
It's a conservative!
It's a liberal!
It's Supermouth! Yes, it's Supermouth, strange visitor from the past with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal talk show hosts. Supermouth, who can change the course of local politics, bend ears with his bare mouth, and who, disguised as Mike Wiley, mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan radio show, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way.
Good morning, and welcome to another adventure in the podcast radio. I am your host, the evil Mike Wiley, former evil radio talk show host, now evil podcast host, but today is the last show. We are ending it today, but I have to do this show because I've nailed the election fraud 2-3 years ago. I exposed everything. Matter of fact, I decided to do this show after I watched President Trump on national TV, but not covered by ABC, CBS, and NBC. Huh, they must be involved. Huh. You know, the nice part about the guilty people is they go, yeah, I did it. Oh, but I didn't do it. Never mind. They give themselves up. They give themselves up. The question is, whenever will something be done about it? So the big question is, Mike, how did you figure out the election fraud? How did you figure out what it was all about? Do you have any documentation, Mike, to prove your consensus, your conclusion that the Democrats stole the election in 2020? Modus operandi is often shortened to the MO. It's his MO. It's her MO. Oh, women never commit crimes, so it's only men's MO. Male is a Latin phrase that means mode of operating, or a specific way of doing something. It describes a person's or group's habitual method of work, routine style, and pattern of behavior. Criminal investigations. Method of crime, a distinct and repeating pattern used by a criminal to commit an offense. Connecting cases. Police is using a MO to link multiple crimes to the same person, or in this case, the same political party. Focuses on the physical steps, tools, and choices needed to carry out the act. Ladies and gentlemen, the Democratic Party committed the 2020 election fraud, and here's how I know why. Because of their modus operandi, which I'm going to cover right now. The Democrats lost the Civil War, the first part. They've been winning the second one ever since April 19th, 1865. The Confederate military couldn't defeat the U.S. military on the battlefield. Of course, nobody can. We all know that. So the Democrats had to come up with a different method of political warfare. And they invented it on April 14th, 1865, when they shot the Republican president who had won re-election by a landslide. Democrats don't like that. If you look at the history of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, Democrats rarely win re-election unless they commit a major financial crime in 1929, which we're going to get to. Okay. Lincoln won re-election. They shot and killed him. Political tool was a gun. In 1877, for the 1876 presidential campaign, we had some election fraud. The disputed election in 1876 was highly contested due to fraud and voter suppression. Really? Who'd have done that, Mike? Samuel Tilden won the popular vote and held 184 electoral votes, just one shy of the 195 needed. However, 20 electoral votes for 4 states, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon, were in dispute. Now, I don't know where Oregon comes from. I actually think that the actions in Oregon probably were a mistake or something, because they had nothing to do with Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Now, why was there election fraud in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina? Because the U.S. military, or the Union Army, was still in charge in those 3 states. And the reason why they were in charge in those 3 states is because the Democrats, after losing the Civil War, decided to come up with an organization called the Ku Klux Klan and cause a lot of hell and damage. But we thank them for helping us get the NRA, which came out around that time, and because they said that black people needed to be able to have the right to carry guns so they could shoot through the white cloth that was on a horse, riding around all day, causing issues. So, what's the deal? Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina still had Union soldiers, still had a Union governor for that state, and the Democrats didn't want that. So what happened? Terms of the compromise. It's called the Compromise of 1877. Look it up. To prevent Southern Democrats from blocking the official electoral count through a filibuster, Republican allies held secret negotiations with moderate Southern Democrats. The agreement stipulated that in exchange for Hayes securing the presidency, Republicans had to meet several conditions. 1. Remove all remaining federal military forces from the former Confederate states, Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana. Which is interesting because those were the 3 states, really, that had some problems with your election. In other words, the Democrats did election fraud to create this ability to do this. Do you understand? The Democrats used election fraud, tampering with an election, to get an accomplishment of political order done. Modus operandi. At least 0.1 Southerner to the Hayes presidential cabinet. Provide federal subsidies for the construction of a transcontinental railroad through the South. And enact legislation to help industrialize the South. So, the Democrats have committed election fraud in order to get something done. That would be considered modus operandi if they continue to do it. So we know they have. One other thing the Democrats like to do is shoot Republican presidents. President James Garfield assassinated after winning in 1880. On July 2nd, 1881, political tool used was a gun. So we have a gun for the assassination of Lincoln. We have election fraud for 1877. We have a gun for James Garfield and for President McKinley, who won re-election by a landslide. You can't have that. Now, why did they have to kill American presidents then? Republican presidents. Because for some reason, we still can't figure it out. We thought about having Martians come down and try to explain it to us. But for some reason, Democrats never really get reelected over and over and over and over and over again. They don't. Until they committed another issue we're going to get to. We're just going by chronological order. You want to know how I figured out about the election fraud and how I found everything out and how I was able to piece everything together? It didn't hurt that I've got years in forensic accounting and financial wizardry and all sorts of good stuff. I was actually going to go into the FBI for white collar crime when I first got out of college, but I ended up taking a job with a defense contractor. So now, 1907, the Panic of 1907. It's a Democrat finance scam. The Panic of 1907 was a scam. What was the purpose of the scam? To get people to agree that we needed a Federal Reserve. We needed a central bank. You know, we used to have a central bank until one day they pissed off Andrew Jackson, President of the United States, in 1837, and he decided, hey, enough of this crap. He thought that they were crooks, they were loaning money to themselves, and he got rid of the central bank. And we hadn't had a central bank. But for some reason, in order to control the United States and control the American people, you know, the free American people, their lives, we need to have a central banking system. So let's have a panic. And let's scare the crap out of people. And then they'll go, gee, maybe we need a Federal Reserve. The Panic of 1907 occurred in October 1907. It was pretty much cleaned up on its own. Teddy Roosevelt. They tried to shoot him on October 14th, 1912. See, Teddy had been a Republican president. He actually was vice president when McKinley was shot, so he took over that, and then he won re-election. There he is. He's a Republican that won re-election. You know, that's power you don't want to deal with. And back then, they hadn't created a law yet to say, oh, you can only run for president for 2 terms. Who made up that law? Who do you think? Yeah, it was the guys that committed the financial fraud in 1929, and we were getting to that. I'm giving you the modus operandi of why I figured out who they did and what they did to steal the election, and I've got that. Just give me some time to go through this. I hate to skip stuff. Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt gets shot. He's running for president in 1912. But they can't have that. Because if Teddy Roosevelt wins the election, you're going to have the 16th and 17th Amendment never occur. The Federal Reserve would never occur. You have to have Democrats in power to destroy America. Republicans, for some reason, I guess, love the country. What do you think? So Teddy survives, but Woodrow Wilson wins. So in 1913, the year of our death as a nation, they passed the 16th Amendment, which was for them to prepare for war. Why? Well, we, the wealthy people, can't pay for the war. We have to get the American people to pay for the war. But the Constitution prevents us from doing that, so we have to change the Constitution so we can steal money from the American people every year. Make them fill out these stupid forms, and every year we're going to increase the forms, increase the complexity, even though that we say they're simplified. Yes, the U.S. tax code is a scam. It's caused us to lose trillions of dollars, but no one's gone to jail for it yet. 17th Amendment. Now what are we going to do? Well, we have to remove the power of the states from choosing who's in the Senate. See, the founders of our nation kind of figured stuff out pretty good. And their major concern was creating a government that could turn into a monster. Well, it's turned into a monster, thanks to the year 1913. So the 17th Amendment passed, and it says, hey, the state legislatures can no longer choose their own senators. We're going to let the millionaires in the globe and in the United States, let them pick their own own senators and put money into them, and then they can get whatever they want. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to destroy the U.S. Senate. And instead of having people in for an average of 6 years, we're going to have severe dumbbells like the senator from Washington, who's a gym teacher. She's been there for over 30 years. That means she's won election and won re-election 5 times. Now on the 6th time. She just won her 6th election. Okay. The blue states did better on the 17th Amendment than the red states. The Federal Reserve Act was then signed into law. Let's create the Federal Reserve so they can go ahead and destroy the economy whenever we want it to happen.
Oh my, the Federal Reserve would never do that.
Unless it's 1929. So, now that you can tax the hell out of the American people, you can elect senators based on what wealthy people want, and then have the Federal Reserve to do all the global stealing and whatever. So now it's time for war. So we had Democrat War number 2. Democrat War number 1 was the Civil War. They started it. Democrat War number 2, remember, America only goes to war when Democrats are in office. Now everybody's going to go,
oh, Mike, Trump's in office and he's attacking Iran.
I'm sorry, did Iran attack us 47 years ago? And what president did anything about it? Oh, none of them? Don't hand me that crap. All right, so Democrat War number 2 starts. That's the World War I. And then the Republicans come to power. In 1920, because people didn't like the income tax and people didn't like the inflation that was going on. Remember, inflation is caused by government spending. So they elected Republicans. Republican landslide, 1920. Republican landslide, 1924. Republican landslide, 1928. All right, that's enough. That's enough. We can't deal with any more of this stuff. We've got to do something about it. Okay. Use the rat phone? Yeah. Yeah, listen, that new organization you guys started, the Federal Reserve, yeah, we need you to get involved. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Cause 1/3 of the banks to close, hold back money when you're not supposed to, and crash the crap out of our nation, and then that'll go through the rest of the world. We'll call it the Great Depression, and that will help us get elected for at least 60 straight years, and there'll be no more Republicans ever again. They'll be sent to Mars. Thank you. So, the Federal Reserve caused the Great Depression. Don't believe me? Here's a clip right now of Milton Friedman telling you what happened. And he knows a lot more than I do.
There is hardly any view that is more widespread than the view that somehow or other the Great Depression was produced by a failure of private business. That view is held not only by those who are in favor of greater role of government, it is held by almost everybody. I venture to suggest that if you go to any bankers, the people who are here today at this banking conference, and if you talk to them, I venture to say 9 out of 10 of them, if they hadn't heard what I'm going to say, that 9 out of 10 of them would say, well, of course, the Great Depression was a failure of private business. It was due to an overextension, over-speculation in the 1920s, or it was due to an excessive concentration of wealth in the hands of the wealthy at the expense of the poor in the 1920s, or it was due to speculative investment abroad, or whatnot. But it was a failure of private business, and government had to step in order to rescue private business from its own failure. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The Great Depression was produced, in my opinion, and I may say this is not a random opinion, the Great Depression was produced by a failure of government. by a failure of monetary policy. It was produced by a failure of the Federal Reserve System to act in accordance with the intentions of those who established it. It was produced by a failure of the Federal Reserve System despite the presence of knowledge on the part of many of the people in the system about the right course of action. But as an objective scholar, I can tell you what the facts are. The facts were that from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, the amount of currency, the amount of bank deposits, what Mr. Eccles referred to as M2, that total amount of money declined by 1/3. The total number of banks went down by 1/3. And why did the quantity of money decline? It declined because the Federal Reserve System failed to prevent the decline. The Federal Reserve System could have prevented the decline at all times. There never was a moment during that period when the Federal Reserve did not have the power to prevent the decline in the quantity of money. If it had prevented the decline in the quantity of money, you might still have had a recession, but it would have been a garden variety recession. It would have been over in the middle of 1930 or early in 31 at the latest. It would not have been the major catastrophe, not only for this country but throughout the rest of the world. So the Great Depression was not produced by a failure of business. On the contrary, it was produced by a failure of government, and a failure of government in an area in which responsibility had been assigned to government since the founding of this country. The Constitution of the United States. It gives Congress the power to coin money and set the value thereof. And it was in the management of this fundamental function of government that government failed and produced the Great Depression.
All right, during the Roaring '20s, there was zero inflation. So if there's zero inflation, or it's like 0.1, 0.2, why would the Federal Reserve increase the interest rate to about 6%? Why would they go that high? Why would they cause 1/3 of the banks to close when they had the power to provide them with money? Why would they want to destroy the United States financially? I learned something the other day. I was watching this podcast, and the guy was explaining about the Civil War and how it almost started in 1838. And the problem was, now get ready for this. The problem was that the North had all this manufacturing and production, and the South had nothing but slaves. So actually, the slaves were recognized as the financial asset of the South, industries of farming and cotton. And therefore, they were able to borrow money and get money based on the value placed on the existence of slaves. Now, not until I heard this was I in favor of reparations. But you got to remember, Abraham Lincoln wanted to help the slaves that were now free to begin something in their lives. And so he gave them a mule and 40 acres. What can they do with a mule and 40 acres? Build something of their own. Let them grow the land. Let them be farmers. Farmers can make a lot of money, especially when Republicans are in office. Farmers get the hell kicked out of them when the Democrats are in office because the Democrats are always trying to steal their land, give it to their buddies in China, and all that crap. I believe that any black person who can prove their ancestry were slaves, that 40 acres and a mule is still owed. Because it wasn't until after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated that the vice president, who happened to be a Democrat named Johnson, amazing, the two vice presidents during their their boss's execution were Democrats, and their names were Johnson. I believe there is a legal matter on the reparation that's financial oriented and based on fact. But you have to have the documentation to prove it. You have to go back to prove it. I believe that they can prove that. Because evidently, there's financial documentation that was created to establish the value of the slaves in the South as an asset. So, the golden age of black enterprise, 1900 to 1930. I've already talked about this on my show. I'm going to have a news article screen come up about it. The way I do the show is I give you all the information and then I slot in the documentation to prove it, because a lot of times I say things and they go,
Mike, what are you talking about? It's a little crazy.
and then I present the evidence and they go, okay. So, golden age of black enterprise, 1900 to 1930. Over 60,000 black businesses were created. Now, okay, there was one problem with the blacks. Okay, they weren't Democrats. They, for some reason, didn't want to become part of the political party that enslaved them and their ancestors for years. Okay, and the Republican Party was created to free slavery, so of course they're Republicans. So here they are, enjoying life. They're Republicans and they're making money. They've got their own businesses because the Jim Crow laws were just saying, hey, get out of town, and they went north and they started their own businesses. Okay. How are we going to end this? We need to start a second plantation, as the Democrats would consider it. So that was the purpose of the Great Depression, was to destroy 30 years of business growth and entrepreneurship by blacks, black Republicans. Black Republicans were in Congress. There were no black Democrats in Congress because there were no black Democrats. But right after the economic collapse of the Great Depression, all of a sudden, well, you're all poor now. We've got this thing called the New Deal. Yeah, sit down. We'll deal it to you, and we'll give you the new plantation program. And the funny part about this is, I didn't even hit upon this until one day I was watching a guy on television, some podcast, a black podcaster, and he made this statement. Well, we've been Democrats for 90 years. 90 years. My automatic brain system, natural calculation. So, wait a minute, 90 years. So let's see, that was in 2023, I believe. So 90 years would be 1933. 1933. What happened in 1933? Well, actually, it happened in 1929. The Great Depression began, but it really wasn't much of a depression until the Democrats took over power. This is an Elliott wave graph. Shows the ups and downs and the movements of the Dow Industrial. And if you look real close, you'll see that by 1929, what they called the crash was a correction. Look at where the Dow was going. It was going up for 5 straight years. Actually, 8, 10, 12 years. So what's going on then? The Great Depression actually and the crash began after 1931, when the Democrats began to use it like they do every financial crash that occurs the year before an election when a Republican's in office. 1987, crash, Republican in office. 2007, crash, Republican in office. 1929, Republican in office. Why are there always financial crashes when you have Republicans in office and an election coming up? Elections. Elections are the most important things to Democrats. They must win the election. They must win the election. John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. I remember riding my bike home from school, and a woman came out of her house, and she was crying. And I stopped, and I pulled over. I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "They just shot the president." Now, Kennedy was a Democrat, and normally only Republican presidents in history are killed. But Kennedy had a couple of issues. Number one, he had a vice president who was a Democrat named Johnson, and he was not going to commit to the Vietnam War. And all wars are created by Democrats. All wars are created by Democrats by ignoring stuff, like the attacks from Iran 47 years ago. Remember when Jimmy Carter sent a couple of helicopters into the deserts, and they got sand in them or something, and that was a complete failure? And then what happened? Reagan was elected, and the Iranians went, "Okay, we quit. Get them up." Okay, why? Because they knew that Reagan would kick their ass, just like Trump's kicking their ass. So Kennedy's assassinated. Now, in 1972, this guy named Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, well, he's a pretty sharp guy. And he was leading the re-election in 1972 by some 19 points. You know how in the last year you saw Kamala was up by 1, up by 1, up by 2, up by 3, and then Trump was up by 1, up by 2, up by 3. Nixon was up by 19. And it was May of 1972. So, what's going on here? Other people go,
That's not right. You don't know what you're talking about.
okay, here's a map, and it shows that Nixon was going to win 49 states. Do you think that's a landslide when in 49 states McGovern only took Massachusetts? And Massachusetts was the first main communist country in the United States. Can't have that. Nixon's not campaigning. Matter of fact, Nixon went to China in February of 1972 and opened up relationship with the communist Chinese. And then in May of 1972, he was in the Soviet Union, meeting for a week with the Russians, coming up with treaties and negotiations. For some reason, Nixon decided to make a phone call from Moscow. And it probably went something like this. Yeah, this is President Nixon. Yeah, I've heard the results. Yeah, we're up by 19 points. Yeah. Well, listen, this is what I want to do. I don't know. It could end up being only 18.5 points. It'll still be a landslide, but I'm a little concerned. Do me a favor. Commit some kind of political crime and go over and go into their offices at the Watergate Hotel. Yeah, go in there and put some bugs in the phone, okay? So we can hear what you're doing. Okay, very good. Yeah. And if that doesn't work, wait a month and then go in and make 1,400 copies of everything they've got. But make sure you get caught this time, okay? Thank you. They didn't get caught in May, so they had to do it again. Why? Because you have to be caught. You can't have a fake crime unless you're caught. So this time, those people who were ever, I guess, they were former CIA agents. It was 5 former CIA guys involved in the Bay of Pigs and probably the assassination of Kennedy. And they worked for the Democrats, of course, when they're infiltrating the Republican campaign. And they decide to go and do this research. But they don't get caught in May. You gotta get caught. How else are they gonna know? How's there gonna be a Watergate scandal if you're not caught? Go back in. Make sure you get caught this time. So we're gonna tell you to make copies of 1,400 things. Leave some tape on the door so this time when they check the doors, they'll go, "Oh, something wrong here." And we'll have the FBI and the Washington Post right there ready to capture everything. It'll be great. And then we can get Nixon out of office. It's the Democrats, folks. So the Democrats have a history of committing assassinations, election fraud, treason, Democrat financial scams, global enrichments. Ronald Reagan. I don't know. He looks too gross. Let's kill him. Yeah. 3 months into office, we're going to try to kill him. It failed. Reagan did win in 84 by landslide. Okay, bank scams, savings and loan scam, 1981. And then in 1997, we had the Fannie Mae $1 trillion theft by the Clinton administration. And then in 2007, we had the second half of the Fannie Mae $2 trillion Subversion Act to get Obama elected and to create another financial scam to get $800 billion by the Federal Reserve to support. That was also a scam. It was a scam. 2016, we had the Russia hoax. 2017, we had the continuation of the Russia hoax through fake Mueller investigations. Trump's first fake impeachment. Do you know that the documents the Democrats created for evidence were all found to be fake and fraudulent? Both impeachments. And the only way you find that out is by watching. And I know sometimes it gets a little boring, but you pay attention to it, you realize what happened. But because it happened in the U.S. Senate, they can't be arrested because evidently they have some immunity to steal as much money from the American people, like say $38 trillion. And then, of course, there was the Trump first fake impeachment and the Trump second fake impeachment. Election vote scam cover campaign, January 6th. January 6th. Okay, what do we know? We know that Democrats committed campaign fraud, election fraud. Who else would it have been? The Martians? Now, I didn't know anything about the Chinese, but I knew from my examinations of the Triad of Terror, which began in 1990 with the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane in November 5th, 1990. The rabbi had some interesting information. He had these 6 boxes in Arabic. And he was assassinated by the guy that was going to lead the World Trade Center bombing, the first one, the truck bomb in 1993 that the Clintons allowed to continue. The FBI have had an inside person in every single program that went on killing Americans during the Clintons. I have no idea why they haven't sat in an electric chair yet. I'm serious. The greatest crime lords in the world are Democrats. So now we have an election scam. Okay? Mike, how do you know it's the Democrats? Well, who else would it be? Okay. How can you tell there was election fraud? Huh? Anything stick out? Mike, how do you know there was election fraud? Okay, let me introduce you to, by the way, ever hear of a law firm called Perkins Coie? It was created in 1912 out of Seattle, Washington. And then funny thing is, after they became an entity, all the crap began for years. Meet one mastermind of the 2020 election scandal, Hillary Clinton's lawyer. Mark Elias, the Democrat National Committee's election lawyer and legal advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Yeah, the Russia hoax guy. They pulled him out of the closet. He has filed more than 50 lawsuits around the country challenging state election laws in advance of the 2020 presidential election. So, the Democrats are actively doing things before the election to do what? To steal the election. Okay? Let me read something to you. Have you ever heard of U.S. Code 611? Voting by aliens. It shall be unlawful for any alien to vote in election unless they have a license or a birth certificate from the planet Mars. I'm just kidding. It shall be unlawful for any alien to vote in any election held solely or in part for the purpose of electing a candidate for the office of president. Okay, the election is held partly for some other purpose. Aliens are authorized to vote for such other purpose under a state constitution. So in other words, aliens can't be voting in federal elections. That law has never changed. Why did the Democrats think they could get 18 million new votes? Well, we couldn't get 18 million new votes. See, that was the thing. You have to create fake votes because you haven't allowed 18 million people into the country yet because you're not in power. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? In this case, you have to create 15 million votes in order to steal the 2020 election. Okay. The reason I decided to do this show is because of this. Michigan authorities suspect there was a possible voter registration fraud scheme occurring across multiple states during the 2020 election and were concerned enough to bring in the FBI. Yeah, the same FBI that allowed the Christians to be destroyed in Waco, allowed the World Trade Center to get blown up in 1993, allowed criminals to blow up Oklahoma City in 1995, allowed the 9/11 to occur. That FBI. Okay, so this is just the news. According to dozens of pages of police reports from the Muskegon Police Department and Michigan State Police, a firm called GBI Strategies was under scrutiny as an organization central to alleged voter registration fraud in the 2020 presidential election, which was first investigated by city and state authorities before the FBI took over and killed the investigation. Contacts between local law enforcement and the FBI continued into 2022, but there's no evidence of what happened after that in memos obtained by Justin News through State Freedom of Information. Police from Michigan interviewed GBI Strategies employees and cited specific instances of registrations that appeared suspicious or fraudulent. Really? What a coincidence. That's what they were there for. They came up with 15 million of them. 15 million. What a coincidence, huh? The Michigan Attorney General's office confirmed earlier this month that there was a state investigation of thousands of suspected fraudulent voter registrations, which were referred to the FBI, the Bridge, Michigan reported. So the Michigan Attorney General, who's a Democrat, is going to investigate why Democrats are trying to steal the election, wouldn't they? Earlier this month, Danny Wimmer, press secretary for the state attorney general, told Just the News that among 8,000 and 10,000 voter registration forms that were submitted to the Muskegon clerk before the 2020 election, some were suspected to be fraudulent. Some. How many is some?
No number given, huh?
An organization turned in some thousands of voter registrations through the fall of 2020, estimated on the high end to be cumulative to 8 to 10,000, and some within the batches were found to be suspicious or fraudulent. I'm going to provide you with a clip of Rudy Giuliani and his person in front of the committee in Michigan, in Detroit actually, and she exposes the scam. And they go, oh, thank you very much. We'll do something about it later.
When I started writing down the ballot numbers and the last names of the person of the ballot that had the name on that ballot, they were all in sequence. These are absentee ballots, mail-in ballots. They cannot be in sequence. 2232 cannot have 2233 next to it, because if they're mailed in, they come in all different numbers. And when I started noticing that these numbers are almost next to each other, like one or the other was in the middle, but then they were almost next to each other, my antennas went up. That's exactly when I thought something is not right here. Then I asked the supervisor. There was not even a date on those envelopes. It said November 0-2020. There was no second number there. Then I said, what is the date on this one? Then they got really mad at me. They said, you're not letting us do our job. You're disturbing us. Not only that, the sequence ballot numbers were all from the same area, like the Goddard Street in the downtown Detroit. Goddard Street, sequential ballots, signatures were all alike. They had no date stamp. It said, like, it was empty after 0. There was no third or second or first or nothing. And none of them were coming up in the system. They were all being entered manually. They even knew that none of these details would even be in the poll book or in the system.
Muskegon police interviewed yet another woman who worked for GBI Strategies from Atlanta, Georgia. She worked with another man from Atlanta and had a supervisor from New York. Wimmer told the Detroit News that GBI Strategies conducts voter registration drives and is headquartered in Tennessee. Yeah, try to find it. There is a business listing for GBI Strategies in Condover, Tennessee, but Just the News was unable to confirm that they are the same entity. Yeah. Okay. So, who hired GBI Strategies to create 15 million fake voter registration mail-in ballots? Who would have done that? Who would have done that? Back to Mr. Elias. He sends out a press release, statement from Mark Elias. Another victory for voting rights. Michigan Secretary of State revises signature match process as a result of federal lawsuit. Okay. This is a press release being sent out by a lying piece of shit who's committed fraud and does it on a regular basis, and he works for Perkins Coie. Yeah, really. So the question then is, how could the Michigan Secretary of State revise signature match processes when the manner of elections are controlled by the state legislatures per the Constitution? How can they do that? How can they change things? In October, we sued Michigan on behalf of Priorities USA to block their unconstitutional signature matching process. Priorities USA is a Democrat sub-organization of mishumans. To block their unconstitutional signature matching process. Now, wait a minute. If the process is created by the state legislatures and the Constitution of the United States gives them the power to do it, how could it be unconstitutional?
Well, I just wanted to use that word. It's really not constitutional.
As a result of our lawsuit, the Michigan Secretary of State recently, who's a Democrat, revised her guidance to adopt the protections we sought. So what happened is they dropped the lawsuit. A lawsuit that never really happened. So what did they do? Requested directive from Secretary instructing clerks to provide notice of signature mismatch determinations within 24 hours of such determination. Requested directive from Secretary implementing a cure procedure for absentee ballots and ballot applications, allowing up to 14 days after receiving notice to cure applications. Instructs clerks to presume that the signature is valid, and a voter's signature is only considered questionable if it differs in multiple significant and obvious respects from the signature on file. So you have the Democrat Party's law firm representing two Democratic Party organizations, nonprofits, against the Democrat Secretary of State. We're having a party. We're having a party. Okay. Now let's see what else we got that's new. Okay. Here we go. So, okay. You got to give the Democrats credit. The Democrats know they're committing fraud. They know they'll probably get caught, which they did. But they've got to get the American people to believe that it wasn't fraud. And it wasn't anything bad that they did. So we're going to have a lawsuit filed within 10 days of the election, or actually 14. I think it turned out to be 10. I know that this paperwork was done before the election even finished. Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, MWFRO, versus Donald Trump et al. And 3 Detroit residents in a lawsuit. So they sued Michigan Welfare Rights, and they were represented 3 Detroit residents in a lawsuit challenging President Trump and the Trump campaign's ongoing efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election of disenfranchising black voters in Michigan. Specifically, efforts to pressure state and local officials not to counter-certify votes. LDF and co-counsel Jenner and Block represent the NAACP. The lawsuit alleges that both the Republican president and his campaign are in violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Section 1985(3) of the KKK Act. In other words, the Republicans are acting like Democrats. And that's not right. How do I know the Democrats were behind the election fraud? There's too much evidence to ignore it. It's all there. But you got to have a cover-up plan. Now, this one thing. That lawsuit was in October of 2019. October, November, December, January. 4 months before COVID hit. 4 months before COVID hit. Why did they need mail-in ballot signatures to be fraudulent 4 months before there was a reason for needing mail-in ballots? What did the Democrats know that we didn't know? Huh. Amazing. You'd almost think that the Democrats and the Communist Chinese were in bed together. Matter of fact, Mike Wiley, that's me, has done shows on the Triad of Terror that began on November 5th, 1990, when Islamist terrorists working for Osama, Obama was later, Osama, the Clinton administration, and the Communist Chinese were in bed together, and they still are today. That's the terror. So, of course, the Chinese were probably involved in the election fraud, but the Democrats want you to, it's the Russians in Trump. It's the Russians in Trump. No, don't look at the accident. Look at the sky. Look at the birds. Can we have some electric chairs presented and get this thing done? Why are these people getting away with this? That's what I want to know. Why are Democrats getting away with this crime? Congressional Record, January 6, 2021. Announced by the Speaker, as the House comes to order for this important historic meeting, let us remind it that each side, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, each have 11 members allowed to be present on the floor. Oh, really? Others may be in the gallery. Well, they can be in the gallery. Where else can they be? In their offices? Or in a location hiding from being killed by Democrat squad? Gentlemen on the Republican side of the aisle will please observe social distancing and the agreement to have 11 members only. Well, 11 and 11 is 22. I think in order to have a quorum, you need like half plus one. You had to have 50%. So January 6th never actually legally happened. Joe Biden was never legally made president, which means Donald Trump was still president of the United States. He won re-election because it was never proven that Biden won the election legally. And we know he didn't. So Trump is going to run, if he runs again, he's running for his fourth term. What I don't understand is why he doesn't go in and assign special prosecutors and the FBI to go in and complete the 4-year investigation of the auto pen shit that's been going on. You know how many trillions of dollars the Democrats stole in those 4 years under Biden? Close to $8 trillion. $8 trillion. See, the Democrats, they're not bank robbers. So they don't go into the bank with guns and go, okay, give us your money. No, they go into Congress and they steal it from the federal government and the taxpayers. That's what they do. So 4 months before this happens, the Democrats come up with a plan to get rid of the ability to make sure that the signatures, all fraudulent signatures, never get thrown out. They never get stopped. And so that's how we know that the Democrats stole the 2020 election. But I have a schedule, documented schedule. You can find it, where the Democratic Party gave $5 to $6 million to GBI to do this stuff. Half of that amount of money came from the Democrat Senatorial Committee. Now, why would the Democrat Senatorial Committee pay for half of that? Well, let's see. In 2020, didn't we have 2 criminal Democrats running for Senate in Georgia, and they won? And of course, they won this runoff that didn't make sense to me. Yeah, and then didn't we get a Democrat from Arizona in 2020? And didn't we get a senator from Michigan in 2020? And I believe we also got a senator from Wisconsin in 2020. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 senators. We lost 5 Senate seats because of election fraud. And the Democrats should be punished for it. And I'm talking electric chair, baby, because the crime was trillions of dollars. Those lunatics spent $8 trillion in basically 2 years, because in 2023, the American people, just like they did in 2010, put back Republicans in power. Because when you've got a Democrat president and a Democrat Congress, your underwear is going to get stolen. And everything else in your house is going to get stolen. That's the crime. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm done. Okay, I've been complaining about this stuff and presenting facts for 3 years. Okay, it's your turn. I'm retiring. And it's about time I retire. You're on your own, America. But I will gladly be a guest on any show. Anybody wants to pull me on TV or on radio and give me the 572 questions, it's all up here. So, I love you. Goodbye.